welcome everybody to Exceptional Effort, Mind and Body. I'm here with Heather, Stephen, Annemie, and myself, Damian Andrews. We're talking about flexibility, how to deal with things that come up and change, and how that affects our health, our mind, and our body. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on which part of the country you are in.
Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
So how important is it to be flexible in how we do things? Does that, from a perspective of your body, how does that affect our mind, and how does that affect our flow into our body?
I'm thinking of that saying, I don't know if it's a proverb or a quote, but that a reed that doesn't bend will break. And that always comes to mind when I think of flexibility and the ability to roll with things changing and just like bend. It's a lot better than being rigid because you will break. It's harder if you're rigid to deal with things.
Yes.
I completely agree with you on that. I was going to say too, the more flexible you are too, the more you can adapt to the circumstance and the happier you generally are. If you try to control for everything, that's when things generally go south, and that's when you see the negative attitude come out.
Yeah.
And so it's super important that you remain flexible, just simply out of your sheer will for happiness and for finding joy in life, like finding the opportunities as they come rather than, trying to control, like I said, for every possible element and for everything that's taking place.
I like that point of view. Is the control freaks. It's something you observe in people, and I had it myself in some points, that you try to control some parts of your life, or even how a room looks like, or some paper it has to be finished, something, a job that you would like to have to be, that you like to be perfect, but of course things cannot always be done the way you would like them to be, and that's when flexibility comes into play, of course, and it has many benefits.
Yeah, I think there is a connection between flexibility and positivity, like you alluded to there, Stephen, that if you have a flexible mindset, you're more likely to see opportunities, you're more likely to see the good in situations, right? It just seems to be the more positive, productive, and joyful approach.
I can completely relate to that. For a long time ago, I used to be quite an angry person, how I'd approach things, and that anger was probably related to having a very fixed mindset of how things were to go. So I'd have this objective that I want and very objective driven, and if things didn't go that way, I'd get frustrated, and that frustration would build on itself, so that would build a tension within my body, which then related to health not being so great. But like you were talking about before, having that ability to see other options just wasn't there. The mindset just shut down, and I was very focused. This is the only way to do that. Wasn't able to listen to what other people had to say, and then approaching things differently, learning to step back and go, hang on a minute, there's a lot of different ways we can get here. It's more about the objective, and staying focused on that objective, I found, made a big difference in how I was able to achieve things, and that led to my whole body being calmer, more relaxed, and just going with the flow, keeping in mind of what I wanted to do, but then allowing basically the sat nav to take you a different direction and go, okay, I still want to go here, I still want to get to this objective, but there are multiple ways of getting there, and I found that just really relaxed my life completely and changed how I approach things significantly.
I can't picture you being angry.
Oh, sorry.
Can't picture me being angry?
No, I can't picture you being an angry person.
Certainly, not something that happens now because of that flexible mindset, having that ability to look beyond what's currently happening front and center, and I think that makes a difference. Being able to look beyond what is right in front of you and stepping back and saying, okay, what am I really trying to do here? What do I really want to achieve? That bigger picture and then going, how can I use what's currently happening to get me there? And that made changed how I approach things significantly. And so definitely from my perspective, you're right. Today, it's very rare that I will get angry. If I get angry, it's usually a deliberate show of force where it's needed, but it's very, very rare. So.
Well, I can relate to that as well, that we all get angry, or maybe in the past that it happened to me as well. But like you said, you go with the flow afterwards, and you learn the advantage of broadening your mindset and to see how much more opportunities are in front of you once you flip the coin, let's say.
Other options.
So
Go ahead.
I was going to say, during this pandemic, I think a lot of people have found themselves in this position of frustration where they've come up against a wall or a seeming lack of opportunity in their work, right? And then you can tell who has what type of mindset based on how they've adjusted or dealt with this. Some people have just doubled down to create opportunities. They've reached out to their network. They've done a lot of brainstorming, and other people just naturally kind of shut down when something, a roadblock comes in their path. They just panic and they freeze, and all they can see is the block. They see a blockage and nothing else, no options or opportunities, right? It's been interesting to look at how different people respond to that.
Yeah, it's interesting that flexible mindset allows you to not fear change, which is, I think, really important, more so important in today's world. As you mentioned, the COVID-19 has changed how a lot of people have to do things, and being able to be flexible takes away that fear of change, because you know that you can deal with it. And part of it's having that self-esteem, strong self-esteem, to know that you're okay to deal with what's happening, no matter what it is, whether it's COVID-19 or just a simple change.
Yeah.
As well.
No, I definitely agree with that. I obviously, as you guys know, I took a trip across the country, and we drove over 2,700 miles and traveled through 11 different states in the process. But yeah, like along the way, we had these, it was almost like an itinerary set up, and what could go wrong did go wrong. And so we found ourselves at, we had all these stops planned out, for strategic locations to sleep, and we stayed at none of them, none of them. And, we had an unexpected storm hit us when we were going between Wyoming and Nebraska that halted our trip by about 2 or 3 hours. We had planned to be 2 or 3 hours up the road. And so really, this past week showed me, how important it is to be flexible with regards to traveling and expecting the unexpected, and, just seeing it firsthand in nature. When nature calls, nature calls. There's no stopping storms, there's no stopping tornadoes. And then making sure that you have, something that's within it that is planned and is going to happen. So on our fourth day, when we had a 12-hour drive, we decided to stop at Niagara Falls, and that was what made the biggest difference in the world in that fourth day. And what was extremely unexpected there is there were no tourists, and so we had the opportunity to enjoy being in Niagara Falls and seeing the full length of its beauty from both sides, from the Canadian side and from the New York side.
Canadian side represent. Our side is better. Just saying. But it's beautiful. Yeah.
It is.
That's a funny side effect of everything being shut down. I've experienced that once or twice. It sucks on the one hand, but then sometimes you go places and there's no people, and you're like, oh, how nice. It's an unexpected and sort of surreal benefit of having no people around.
That's one thing I've noticed here. I hear a lot of stories around the world, and but in Australia at the moment, it's almost like it's normal. The one thing that isn't normal is traffic isn't back to normal yet. So there's a lot of the flow through of traffic is still quite good, which I really enjoy.
Yeah.
But everything else, restaurants are opening, people are moving around as you would normally expect. And that's what sort of, I was thinking about that and how being flexible and that mindset of accepting imperfection. Because I know part of, as we were talking about before, I mean, part of my reason that I get frustrated is that I had this perfectionist mindset where it had to be exactly right. Not just the end result, but achieving the plan. The route to the plan had to be exactly as I had planned it out because I needed it to be. Maybe that's my OCD, but I needed it to be. Had to be exactly right. And I found letting go of that imperfection. Part of that happened was in a long-term relationship that I was in. My partner was the opposite of me. I'm very neat, tidy, and organized. She was the opposite. I remember one time she was away for a holiday, and I got the cleaner to go through and sort through her clothes, and we found 34 pairs of jeans exactly the same, all just stashed.
They're not exactly the same.
They're different.
They're
different.
Man, you don't understand.
But from that perspective, I learned, to have that approach of I was, my background. Part of my problem with that was when I was brought up, my mum made me, everything had a place. My socks had to be folded exactly right. When I joined the military, when I was in the army, I could fold my bed sheets exactly how they had to be military position because that's how I had to make my bed every morning. And but then having to live in that, for 10 years, lived in a space where someone was the complete opposite, I learned from that to go, hey, it doesn't really matter. And as soon as I let go of that perfectionist mindset of how things went, it opened, again, a whole bunch of new doors with regard to flexibility and the ability to deal with things in a different way. So that letting go of that imperfection, if you suffer from that, from your inflexibility, it makes life a little bit easier and you see different things that you didn't see before.
You mentioned traffic, and it's interesting because Toronto is notorious for terrible traffic on all our main highways, the Gardiner Expressway. Getting through the city, like if you just want to go from uptown to downtown, could easily take an hour and a half, which on a bike would take you 10 minutes. So like the traffic is really bad. And I love driving and I love city driving. And a lot of people I know are afraid to do it and they won't drive in Toronto. They just, refuse because they panic. It sounds really stressful to them. But I always say the reason I enjoy it and I don't freak out, I don't get road rage, is because I fully expect to be delayed. I fully expect bikes to go in front of me. I expect construction, weird shutdowns for no reason. Like all of it, I'm ready for it. I have that mindset when I get in my car and drive in the city that I know it's going to be crazy. So because I'm expecting that imperfection and that kind of level of chaos, my hopes are not dashed. I'm not constantly feeling offended that my plans are derailed, which is, I think, why a lot of people get angry in traffic. They have an expectation, and that expectation is to not be delayed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love driving in traffic, but only because that's how I view it. I'm expecting chaos.
It's interesting. Like that was one thing that I noticed too on the East Coast. Like everybody was telling me about like all the traffic, and I didn't even have the opportunity to experience that piece of the East Coast. Like when we went out to Maine, there was hardly any traffic, and it was Ogunquit, I think is where we were at. It was like right along the coast, and like usually it's like bumper to bumper for like 30 or 40 minutes, just to get through like a 2-mile stretch. However, going in there, we had to be flexible with regards to where it is that we could go, because 3/4 of the stores were still, closed, and restaurants, were hit or miss, coffee shops. Had to be very mindful of, where it was that we were walking when we were out on the beach. Still, I think that with this pandemic, there's been that, that sense too, where you have to be flexible depending upon who it is that you're around or who it is that you're engaging with. And, obviously don't react to somebody who's, yelling at you because you're not wearing a mask and you're standing within 6 feet. Whereas, others may not, mind that, that being close and personal. So there's quite, an abundance of diversity of people's reactions to what's going on right now.
Do you guys think that flexibility is passive or active? Because I've started to change my thinking to realize that there's an active role you can take in being flexible and creating opportunities. So it's like you're not just looking for an open door to walk through, but you're actually making holes in the wall. Like if there isn't a path, you carve one out, you make one. And if you're willing to create opportunities, then you're going to have a multitude of paths to choose from, simply because you're active in your approach, you're not passive. That's how I've shifted and I've made opportunities.
Coming back to that driving that you talked about before, with people getting angry, I found that from my perspective, people's reactions to me driving, especially when I mess up when I'm driving, is less angry, because I react. I'm proactive, and if I cut someone off, I'm like, oh, sorry, and I'll wave in the background, going, apologise, and I found that I've seen people get angry and then go, oh, that's okay, and they move on rather than. And so I found that proactive approach does make a difference. You can have that flexible mindset and allow other people to be flexible by how you approach things. Sorry, Annemie, you had something you were going to say there too?
Well, I was reacting to Heather, if it's something that you do proactive or is passive. Well, it's like if you're not very flexible in the body, if you're a stiff person and you would try to bend over and you're not able to reach to your toes, for instance. I'm not very flexible because I don't do sports very often. But I learned that it all starts in the mind. I thought it was because I don't stretch enough my legs or something. But somebody explained to me that it starts in the mind. So I still have to read about it, because I just learned about it a few days ago by coincidence. But if you want to be more flexible physically also, it's not just mentally, but it's also physically, it starts in the mind. And I found this, maybe Stephen knows more about this. I found it...
I would say, Heather or I probably know a little bit. It has to do with how the muscles are communicating with your brain, and we have receptors in there for stretching and for retracting, and so you almost have to teach yourself to kind of overcome, it's a sensation, it's an awkward position that you've never been in. And through time, I think that what happens is your mind senses it, it picks up on it, and immediately turns it off when you're going into the motion. Mm-hmm. So that's like a little bit of what I know about it. Obviously, it's not completely understood, like what exactly is going on. However, there is a communication piece to it. Okay. So that I do know. And I mean, and the same thing is like, in sports, like having a flexible mindset, like when you're competing as an athlete, or when you're putting your body through a turmoil that it's not used to, can allow you to relax and to overcome something that you never thought that you'd be able to overcome. Mm-hmm. I was going to add in too, like, since we're on the topic of driving, just a little bit before I quiet down, having multiple routes that you take to work, like purposefully. So that goes to the whole idea of flexibility. That's huge too, in reminding you to be present and to be in the moment. So I mean, like, I have like 3 or 4 routes that I was taking to my school, and when I found myself angry or frustrated, and I noticed the pattern of me taking like this certain route to work, I would purposefully change it up and veer off course onto a side road or onto a different route in order to change my mindset from that cyclical view of, you know, the hamster spinning and not stopping.
It's an important point that you raised there, Stephen. I very much did that with simple tasks like tying my shoes. You probably notice, or you may notice now, for those watching, that if you pay attention to how you put your shoes on, you'll probably find that you do it the same every time. You'll either put your right or your left shoe on first. And what I did was I made an effort to go, okay, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to put my other shoe on first, or I'm going to make my bed differently. I'm going to do something, break that routine, which helped create that flexible mindset to be able to do things differently. Just those little things like that I found made a huge difference in my approach as to how I did things.
Yeah, no, it's really cool, and it goes back to your point, Heather, on the flexibility being active. I definitely agree that it can be very active, and obviously for some, through time, it develops into, you know, being a perception of passive. Nonetheless, I think that the process is active. That's just my whole take on it. I think that you have to be proactive in order to be flexible, and, you know, it takes work, and it's not something that just happens overnight.
Yeah. One of the ways I see that demonstrated is when people say, you know, if they've lost their job or they've lost work, and they say, well, there's nothing else. I have nothing else. I don't have an option. And it's as if that this is an invocation, you know, they're saying that and they're speaking that into reality, and it's all they see. But people who take action to, you know, add to their network, cold call, send out a bunch of emails, start doing research online for other, you know, options and ideas, those people they're taking some kind of action, right? And there's always a ripple effect. I find if you reach out and you take actions, something will happen. There's an equal or opposite reaction, right? Like you can't make a move without something being stirred. So even if you're not sure exactly what you're aiming for or what to do in a situation, I feel like do something, do anything is usually better than sit in your box and don't see options, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or just sitting there binge watching Netflix can also, you know, get up and do something. Exactly. That makes it.
Yeah, that won't help.
The other thing I found really helpful from my perspective that I learned in being more flexible is your own ego. From my perspective, my ego, I used to be a bit of a know-it-all, and I could, you know, so when I was listening to people, I was like, no, this is the way you got to do it. It's got to be done this way. And I would be shut down to other possibilities because I wasn't listening, because my own personal ego what got in the way of me allowing myself to listen. And it was humbling myself and going, hang on a minute, maybe other people know something that you don't. And from that perspective, that opened up a whole different view of things, where now most of the time I'll sit back and listen to other people. I've found my teams that I've worked with come up with so many better ideas if I just let them, and the way they go and they do that, and that gives a whole different flexibility in how to approach things, certainly in a work perspective. And it makes my health a bit better because I'm not stressing about it in the way they go. So that dealing with your own ego for me was a big one, to be able to step back and go, hang on a minute, other people know a little bit more.
Plus you cannot be disappointed with the input from other people either, because there's always a good idea somewhere. You know, people don't just have bad ideas, there are always some good ideas as well. So you're always, there's always a good side.
That sort of speaks to the idea of how hard it is to think under pressure. It's difficult to brainstorm under pressure, and when we rely only on ourselves to generate options, then that's a lot of pressure to put on ourselves. And I know personally, when I'm anxious and stressed and under pressure, I find it harder to think. I'm not as creative. So maybe if you relieve some of that pressure by relying on others or delegating, then, you know, creativity flows a little more easily in that environment.
I can agree with you on that, Heather. Like, I think that what it does is it takes the pressure off of you to solely put in the energy and, you know, continuing to rely on yourself. And, that's a part of that's a trust factor too. So letting go and, trusting that other people can do what it is that they're inherently designed to do, and to realize that you hired, these people, or you work with these people for a reason. And so, yeah, I mean, it's huge, and it makes all the difference in the world, and it frees up way more time, when you can see that what your job is, or what your role is within the team, and how it plays into the bigger picture, and being flexible with your team members rather than going against it and resisting it. Anything with resistance requires way more energy. I mean, it's and that's common sense across all topics. You can even look at exercise. You don't want to do more work on the bike than you absolutely have to in a race, for example. So why not sit in the draft and let others do the work for you, so you have the best opportunity to win in the end? Or why not let your teammates work for you, and in some circumstances obviously sacrifice yourself for the greater good, and make sure that you're helping those out that are helping you. So it's like, yeah, it's just a mixed bag, and you can put more energy into those things when you're a bit more flexible.
That's a very important point of noticing what's around you. Like you're saying, you're on the bike and you're following in the draft because you're aware of your situation, and not just the situation that you're currently in, but the bigger picture, and paying attention to that. So you're noticing what's around you to help you get where you want to go. And like you said, you can just sit back in the draft for a little bit. You save yourself a little bit of energy, and then when the time comes, you can charge forward. And I found that works really well across the board in having that flexible approach. I use that a lot. One of my education that I wrote about negotiation, it's more about that listening, because you gain more information by actually listening and paying attention to what's around you, what people are saying, and from that you get more information. And when you have more information, you can be more flexible.
Well, all your points are very valuable until now. I'm really enjoying this conversation and all the points that you're adding to this discussion. I'm more of a listener than a talker today, so go ahead.
You're having a flexible approach, Annemie.
Yeah, well, I definitely have to learn something about flexibility still. I know it's still a learning point for me.
It's a continuum. I mean, it's something that, like, again, going back to what Heather said, it's an active process, and so it's you use it or you lose it, and so it's like it's something you have to maintain through time, and and it's never going to be perfect. And I think that's like, I guess the biggest takeaway for me, in a lot of instances with regards to flexibility, is it's never going to be perfect. And so once you can accept that, and if you can continually remind yourself of that, you'll continue to become more and more flexible, and you meet a heck of a lot more people, and you explore a whole heck of a lot more when you're willing to be flexible.
Well, my situation is a bit like Damian said in the beginning. I like more the ordered things in the house. I like to have my knife in a certain drawer. While my hubby is more like, woo, can be anywhere, But it's also in life. He can take a road. Oh, let's take this road. And I said, no, we don't take that road, And so he's very flexible in thinking. So when we go out, it's always, we never know when you come back home. It's very, because he's super flexible in thinking. Well, I had this thing in my mind, and but he's super happy. You can never disappoint him, because he's always, his mind is very flexible, and this is a very good example of how flexibility can make you happy, because you cannot be disappointed when you're flexible.
I think your husband and I are the same person.
Yeah.
But you know what? When I noticed that my work life and career were not flexible enough, and when I was feeling quite boxed in and quite rigid, that was part of the motivation for me to start my own business. One of the reasons why I went out on my own to be entrepreneurial rather than work for someone else is that I can't stand to be so boxed in. I like the idea that I can take an afternoon off, or sleep in late, or you know, the flexibility that I have to order my schedule and to change it every week, to have it just be different all the time. I love that. And when I chose that for myself, it lifted a measure of stress and anxiety that I had, which I didn't even know was connected to that. But for me and my personality type, if I am too rigid and boxed in for too long, I become very stressed. I become bitter with my work, not happy. So I relieved that stress by building flexibility into my work intentionally.
I understand completely, and this is exactly what you need to do. He still does it. Well, he's retired now, but he worked as a forest ranger for many years, exactly for that reason. He just went out in the forest, and his boss was texting him. He didn't reply the phone, you know.
That's a perfect job
said,
for someone like
I
that.
saw your message just now, you know. He was just out in the woods the whole day. He didn't want to be reached. He was just like that. He just did his job in the forest, but leave him alone. And he's still like that. So that was a dream job for him. I understand.
I totally relate to that.
Yes. But a couple of minutes left. Do we want to give everyone a quick takeaway before we wind it up?
Wow.
Who wants to go first? So I pick Stephen. You go first.
Me. So the big takeaway, I guess, from today for me, like as far as like coming from me goes, I would say it's super important to find every opportunity to be flexible and to be active or proactive about being flexible. And in situations where you find yourself not being flexible, I highly encourage you to take a step, you know, into being more flexible with that situation and seeing what the outcome is.
Fantastic. Annemie?
Well, being flexible brings more happiness. I'm living with someone who is very flexible, so I have a mirror in front of me every day in the house. That's true. And I wanted to say something about it. Let's skip it for the moment. This is flexibility is happiness, that's for sure.
Heather?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of all these well-known cliche quotes about, you know, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, or life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. And I think there's a lot of sayings like that because we all know that that is true. Your plans will change, things will come up unexpectedly. So the quicker that you adapt a mindset that understands that, the happier you'll be. Expect the unexpected. And I would also say, that we have a major role to play in creating paths and doors and windows to go through. So if you're not seeing any options, start making things happen.
Fantastic. Well, this has been Exceptional Effort, Mind and Body with Heather, Stephen, Annemie, and myself, Damian Andrews. Hope you enjoyed that. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Pleasure talking as always. Bye.